Yes, libertarianism. I'm sure you remember a lot of this, don't you? It's been a long time since we really had this kind of discussion, especially with regard to anything going on in South America. South America has been just seems to be a breeding ground for all these socialistic movements, mostly because they were probably against the United States because they allied with usually more communist regimes such as Russia in the past, especially during the Cold War. So that certainly did not help the trajectory of South and Mesoamerica. It has been an issue that I'm hoping this can be resolved with this new red wave or wave of anarcho-capitalism or libertarianism with Javier Milei. So I'm really hoping this will be a Tea Party movement that will flourish, because it's not really so much about what's going to happen with Javier Milei while he is in office. It's really a matter of the ideas, because you cannot get rid of ideas. Ideas are more durable than what any war can force. Just like what's going on with Hamas and Israel and all of the state terror operations. It's really about ideas. Wars don't always change people's ideas. If anything, like Ron Paul had said, remember Ron Paul way back in 2008, 2012 of non-interventionist policies, because we'll get blowback? Because there's a lot of blowback now, right? And unfortunately with Javier Milei, he is not very libertarian in that aspect when it comes to non-interventionist policies. So non-interventionist policies are really going to put, I think, Argentina more in a true libertarian position. But I think this is really a great start, just like Ron Paul has said in this latest interview with talking about Javier Milei. He seems to be pretty happy with the fact that at least it's going in the right direction.
The president from Argentina supports this invasion, and he's a Rothbardian. Rothbard would turn over in his grave if he ever heard something like that. So that's one sticking point. As great as his message is, I would like more consistency. Non-interventionist, not only at home, but around the world.
Right. He does say, he touched on the central bank. He's not for a central bank. He want to close that down. But then he wants everybody there to just use dollars. And I think Panama is that way, and they just use dollars. And that's a different type of situation. But and the transition, I think, is going to be rather rough.
He's been disillusioned. Ron Paul, he's been petitioning to end the Fed and this and that for quite some time now. He's written all sorts of publications, one being the most notable, End the Fed, where he's saying the Federal Reserve, a central bank, is what the issue is. That is where all the corruption is going to be bred. It's where all of these non-elected officials are going to go about and get rid of all of our freedoms one by one. And just like what Vivek Ramaswamy has been saying. He has a good voice with this. He's talking about eliminating most of the government. And that's really a libertarian position, because you cannot trust people to make unilateral decisions without the assistance of a democratic society voting for you to be in the first place. So I'm really hoping Javier Milei will really go about in true libertarian fashion, because just like Ron Paul, even though he wasn't elected for president when he ran in 1988, 2008, and 2012, the fact that he didn't make it doesn't matter. His voice was heard, and he maintained a platform of information where all of these ideas could be brought forth. And that's why I think it's very important for people like Jordan Peterson and Joe Rogan to get into this conversation, and they are. Just like in this interview with Dave Smith, I think it's really great because he is talking a lot about the issues of a federal government. And let me remind you that Joe Rogan, he said he was going to vote for Bernie Sanders, the Democratic socialist guy. But so that would kind of put him more of a left-leaning, egalitarian type of libertarian in some ways. And I know a lot of these labels are very kind of confusing. It's confusing for me too, because depending on what a pundit says on TV, on how these ideas are defined, it just kind of just depends on who you're talking to. And that's what makes this kind of difficult, especially when someone like Ronald Reagan was saying, hey, limited government. If the government says they're going to come and help you, then that's something that you have to be wary of. And of course, Ron Paul, he originally was all for Ronald Reagan, but went against him when he knew that he wasn't a true anti-government person, once he actually took reins as the president. So let's see with this particular interview what they have to say, and I think it's pretty important. So let's see.
The Joe Rogan Experience.
All these things get corrupted, and particularly today, we just, the size of the U.S. federal government is it's the biggest organization in the history of the world. There's not even a close second.
And it's got survival instincts.
Yeah.
It doesn't want to give up ground. It doesn't want to give up power.
Well,
it wants to keep expanding. It wants more funding for its projects. It wants to hire more people to deal with something in an incompetent way. And it's not like the free market where, if it's incompetent, there's going to be a competitor that comes along and does a better job, and you're going to lose the market. No.
Well, you ever look at if you look at the list of the richest counties in America, and they're I forget the exact numbers. It's
all lobbyists.
Well, it's 10 of the. They're all, not all, but the vast majority of them are right outside Washington D.C. and right outside New York City. And so, what is that? Is that capitalism? Do you go to Washington D.C. and you go, oh, there's more millionaires there than there are in any other part of the world in the suburbs around Washington D.C.? Is that because there's great big factories and they're making so much stuff that everyone wants to buy? It's no, that's because our centralized federal government spends over $6 trillion a year. And where does that money go? It goes into all the people who are connected to government. And why is it outside of New York City? Is it because in New York City they have great big factories where they're making all the things that everyone wants? It's no. And that's not because of capitalism. That's because Richard Nixon took us off the gold standard, and now it's just this phony casino Wall Street money. So it's everybody, all the people at the top who are making all of this money, they're not making it. It'd be one thing if you're John D. Rockefeller before he went and colluded with the government, and you created Standard Oil, right. And now there's this big oil company, and you're making the country richer by this. But they're not making the country richer. They're extracting wealth out of the...
Okay, just to cut into this a little bit, this guy, he was going to vote for Bernie Sanders, but it sounds like since then, that was a few years ago, he has sounds more libertarian in this sense, saying that the government is bloated and this and that. And in this interview, they're talking about lobbyists, cronyism, and how a lot of this wealth is being extracted from the society for those that have connections. And it has nothing to do with a utilitarian, egalitarian idea of improving a society. A capitalistic society, as Jordan Peterson has said, is one that has benefited the most amount of people per capita, basically, in the history of humanity. Not one type of system has had this much benefit. So, of course, a lot of libertarians are saying, okay, you got to have more free market. And libertarians are saying, okay, get out of the way in order for capitalism can happen. But people are saying, Bernie Sanders is saying, okay, well, corporations, they are very immoral and they're doing bad things all the time. They're trying to screw over the little guy. But in actuality, when we look down at a lot of these corporations that do a lot of these things, they tend to be crony capitalist, which is a lot different than just a regular capitalist. They're not working in a free market system. Libertarians are for getting rid of or penalizing corporations if they are committing fraud, meaning that they get a handout or some kind of assistance from the government that gives them an unfair advantage. And that's not a free market at all. And that is something that we can say in Argentina with Javier Milei is going to have to contend with. Because there's going to be a lot of people, I'm sure, they're going to say, hey, if you give us a backdoor deal, we're not going to tell anybody, we'll give you some money. That's what happened with Christina Kirchner. She was able to do all these backdoor deals, and whoever did better and whoever were willing to do a deal with her, she would reciprocate in that way. And if anybody went against her, she would off them in that way. So that's the kind of corruption that is not good in a free society. And that happens, unfortunately, when you have a bloated government and you have people working that are not elected in the background and making decisions that has nothing to do with your life. So let's see more of this interview.
Grandparents would have had the complete opposite thing. They would have been like, oh my God, it was so much more expensive when I was young and now things are getting cheaper. And in fact, the natural tendency in a society that's developing, the natural pressure is for things to get cheaper. Because if you just think about it, right, like you get more efficient at making them. You know what I'm saying? Like you get more efficient at making them. You can make more things with less manpower. That would naturally put a downward pressure on prices. But because the government keeps printing money, the value of the money goes down. And so we live in this system where things get more and more expensive. But then when you have that, right, and then you have all types of government incentives on top of that, right? So it's like, okay, first of all, you're going to, if you just hold your money, because this is what people used to do many generations ago, was the idea of just saving your money. You save it. But if you just save your money today, Joe.
Okay, this is kind of the idea that society improves as time progresses. Like it's kind of like a building block. So if we're progressing, we should be improving prices, correct? Especially as the United States being a international currency or a hedge for other economies around the world. I think it's very important to see that this has nothing to do with abortion rights or any kind of rights, whether liberal and conservative, of what we always hear on TV. I think that is kind of irrelevant, because how are the Democrats going to pay these socialistic programs if we don't have any money in the coffers anymore? And that can only happen if we have an economy that is going to be thriving. So really the idea is, if we have a revamped economy, then maybe that conversation can be put off at a later time. But as it stands here, we're on dealing with another kind of Cold War, and we're running proxy wars between different regions all over the world. It is a mess right now, and I think it's important to understand that. Why are we talking about the trans stuff right now? Why are we talking about these other things? And of course, they're important in the sense of, okay, government overreaching and trying to legislate morality. And I think it's bad on the international front for even Republicans, or I mean on the national front for the Republicans to say, okay, you can't have an abortion, so we're going to have a ban. If that's something that the states want to do, we can just say, okay, that's a states' right issue, and that's what a libertarian would say. However, with the national government, many people on the left, like MSNBC watchers, CNN watchers, they're going to say, okay, well, we need the government to make it mandated that they have to do this, that, and this, right? That you need to ensure that. And I think this is a big mistake, I think, for our society right now. And I think especially for Javier Milei, he is a conservative when it comes to certain moral principles. And I am too. I'm more on the conservative side of things. But I think his economic thing is going to be more important. Because I think once the government isn't your parents and it goes down to the family, then I think a lot of these moral imperatives will happen more naturally. They'll happen according to just certain principles. I think a lot of these things on the left are usually propagated because the government is taking place of the family, taking place of the lowest form of government, which is your local tribe. So if that is being abolished, then that's really what's going to be the issue. That's kind of results in an end game where individual liberty is not important anymore. So that's going to be pretty much it. I'm going to talk about this topic, but be sure to like and subscribe and stay tuned for more content to come.